Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Balanced Nutrition, the Important Role Nutrients Play in Pome and Drupe Fruit Quality and Yield, sponsored by ICL. I'm Robin Sitberg of Meister Media Worldwide, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. In the next hour, our speakers will dig into the nutritional issues pome and drupe fruit growers face and review ICL's North American trials for apples, cherries, and pears as a component of a complete fruit fertility program. This webinar has been approved for 1/2 CEU credit in nutrient management from CCA. To receive credit, you must watch the entire webinar. Your credits will be submitted 2 weeks from today, the live airtime. We will have time for some questions at the end of the webinar, so if at any time during the presentation you'd like to ask a question, type it in the question pane at the lower left corner of your screen and click Submit. You can do this at any time during the webinar and we'll answer questions at the end. But before we begin, I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Christi Falen is ICL's Agronomy Technical Services Manager for the Pacific Northwest and California. She resides in Idaho and has more than 25 years of experience, including roles in university extension, plant nutrition, and crop protection. Christi earned a BS in Natural Resource Management from the University of Alaska and an MS in Soil Science from the University of Idaho. Dr. Ashley Thompson is our second speaker. She's an assistant professor of horticulture and extension tree fruit horticulturist at Oregon State University. She's keenly interested in improving cherry and pear yield and quality through better soil health and nutrition programs. So now I will turn it over to Christi.
Thanks, everyone. So I wish that we could be able to see you in person, but since we can't, we've put our headshots up here for you to see, for myself and for Ashley. And we actually would like to get to know a little bit more about you and some of your operation. So we're going to go ahead and have them launch some poll questions for you that you can complete that will help us with understanding a little bit more about the crops that you grow and some limitations that you have. So we'll go ahead and have them put that up and then we'll go into the rest of the presentation. I hope everyone can see the poll questions. Okay, can somebody help me if they can see the questions?
Okay, the survey has ended.
Okay, are we ready to go to the next one?
Yes, we are.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so today we're going to go through some of the nutritional requirements and a systems type approach of looking at it for the orchards on nutrition. We're also going to delve into a little bit more about polysulphate and think about some of the research that we can go through and some conclusions that we could draw for it, some little nuggets that we can gather in thinking about how we can customize our fertility program. And then at the end, we'll have a question and answer period. Okay, so do we have the answers to the poll questions, or should I go ahead and go into this one? Okay, I'm going to keep going on this. As we get anything that comes up from the poll questions, I'll have you guys let me know, but I'm going to keep going at this point. So I guess when I look at it, I think of going back to being a kid and being on the teeter-totter. And I loved playing on the teeter-totter, but I always found myself kind of back and forth, but then getting to that fulcrum or being able to be in the center and be able to figure out, okay, well, how can I balance that? So I think of that example, and I think about what we get to do when we're managing orchards and we're growing crops, that we really need to do a balanced nutrient delivery and think about everything in the context of the system that we're working in. So if we look at this diagram on the left-hand side, we can see that there's all of the green lines that are actually antagonism. If we have the black lines, those are actually when we have a stimulation or where it's working together. So, we know that we have the N, P, and K, or the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, that are those keys that we have to do for vegetative growth, bloom, fruit set, cell division, the quality piece, the yield, the fruit sweetness. So those are all key, and we know we've got to do those. But in addition to that, we really need to think about how does calcium play in. You notice all the green lines coming from calcium. It is very much interconnected and can be in an antagonistic way, or a positive if we look at it from that standpoint of what it does for plant health, and what it does for storage quality. So it is really a key component that we have to remember, that we're balancing that calcium that comes in. And then we need to think about the sulfur from the standpoint of the nitrogen and the sulfur relationships and that photosynthesis. If we can't photosynthesize good, then obviously we can't have good growth. We're not going to have amino acids and protein. So that's super critical for being able to develop that tree and orchard and our fruit. And then magnesium, we have to make sure that we have enough magnesium so we don't minimize it, so we can minimize the fruit drop and also have really good leaf growth. So the potassium, calcium, sulfur, and magnesium, along with all of our main N and P, we know are super critical. And then all the micros, we're not going to go into all of those today. We'll touch a little bit on moly or molybdenum as we go through. Okay, so if we think about from the amount of nutrients, we'll start with a baseline and just do some comparisons of the different fruits. We can see that apples and pears are actually pretty similar as far as the N, P, and K that are removed in those fruit as we go through. But if we look at the cherries, we can see that the N, the P, and the K are all very much higher on the amount that's removed. So we have to make sure that we're managing those differently. So then we have our pome versus our drupe fruit that we'd be looking at, some of the N, P, and K major differences that we would see within the Pacific Northwest. And then if we start looking through with that tissue analysis, and we say, okay, well, we can see that same effect there. We have a higher nitrogen content, similar phosphorus, but in the cherry, we have a higher potassium requirements. And then on the calcium side, the pears and the cherries, we have to make sure you can see that higher level that we need to be potentially able to attain. And then as they go through, then you'll get magnesium. For the pears and the cherries, it's also higher. So we got to watch that. The cherries, the sulfur is another one to watch. And then as you go farther down, another piece to the puzzle would be looking at the iron content, how much higher it can be for the pears and the cherries in comparison to the apples. So that just kind of sets a baseline for some of the N, P, and K and some of the other secondary and micronutrients that we would be needing to watch when we go into the orchard. The other thing of the old versus the new is as we have different high-density orchards that we're managing, then we need to be thinking about a lot of the logistics that go into how much growth do we want and how quickly, and the pruning and the thinning, and how do we line that up where we have a nice clean growth and we have it to where we have not too much vegetative growth so that we can maintain it for being able to have those nutrients go into the fruit. We want to make sure that we have even growth and stable yields and it's not growing too much in one year and then not enough in the next. So then we know that we have to combine the fertility and what we do as far as the balance there. We have to think about those logistics of the pruning and the thinning and the high density orchards, making sure that we're thinking through that. How many apples, for example, do we have per square centimeter, so that we can have a good color, good fruit development, and we can make sure that we're getting enough calcium into the plant also. Okay, so then I guess some of our results, I'm looking here, it looks like as everybody filled them in, looks like we'll have some of those that we'll be able to potentially see at the end and go through some of those. So it didn't exactly work 100% the way we thought. So if you guys would, you can put in any time during the Q&A, you can put in if you wanted some certain questions that were in there, or you wanted to highlight some of your crops and how you would like us to answer those. We would welcome that. So these pictures are looking at Honeycrisp apples, and you know there's been a lot of research that's been done on apples and looking at what we can do for bitter pit, and looking at calcium and how that can play a role. But one thing that we see with calcium is it's not just the calcium content in Honeycrisp, it's also their growth pattern that they would have. And it's the water management, and it's thinking about getting the nutrients there at the right time, and it's a teeter-tottering effect that could come into play. Because if we have too much of the vegetative growth that's going on, then it's going to pull the calcium away from the fruit. So there's where I'm kind of like back and forth. You know, here's our teeter-totter. We've got to balance the nutrient requirements along with all of the physiological things that we're doing, and then managing the water as best as we can. This is a case where they had managed everything well, but then they got a late irrigation, and then Honeycrisp, with it being susceptible, then you can see that bitter pit starting to come in. But we do need to make sure that we're watching that balance between the calcium. So then this one kind of highlights it a little bit more. If we think about our fertilization strategies and practices, if we have too much nitrogen, then it stimulates that vegetative growth, which increases that demand for calcium by the foliage. So then the foliage has a stronger pull than the fruit does, so it's not available to the fruit. And then if we get too much calcium or magnesium, then it can compete with that calcium and that translocation of it into the fruit. Another micronutrient deficiency that's super critical would be the boron deficiencies. With it being so mobile and so critical for fruit development, we have to make sure that we're maintaining adequate boron levels. And then if we excessively prune, then we can stimulate vegetative growth, which will promote that calcium deficiency. And then but on the other hand, if we prune during the summer, like the picture that I showed you earlier, then it can be beneficial because it can reduce the vegetation while the fruit is still on the tree, and then the fruit can have a benefit immediately. So that can be a good thing. So we have that teeter-totter and that balance. So ICL provides a comprehensive suite of different growing solutions that can be utilized for the orchards, and it can be utilized to balance out the nutrition. So one of the products that we're going to talk about today is Polysulphate, and Polysulphate we would be putting on for the soil, and you can see it going down at the bottom into the roots. So that would be where we would put that. And then we also have some products we're going to talk about that are in the Agrolution pHLow line. And those are advantageous for putting through a drip irrigation and fertigating. Some other options that we're going to talk about today are High Peak and Nova Peak, along with a Pulse product that has some high moly and nickel and cobalt in it for having that we can use as some foliar options. So within the Nova line, there's a whole bunch of products that we have, a whole lot of choice for you to be able to pick the ones that will fit the specific needs, whether it's early on in the season or whether it's to help with fruit or it's to finish off the crop. There's a lot of different options. The one that we're going to talk about today is Nova Peak, or monopotassium phosphate. It's 05234 as far as the analysis. So let's delve into the polysulphate a little bit more. This is a unique, innovative product that has a very low carbon footprint, and it also, as you'll see, has a prolonged release of nutrients as we look at the next few slides, and we go through those. So it also provides sources as far as, trying to get my phone to turn off here. On some of the messages. Okay, there we go. So as we look through here, we have sulfate that we have that comes at 19.2%, and then we have potassium at 14%, magnesium at 3.6%, and then calcium at 12.2%. It also is a very low chloride or low salt content at 2.4%. So that's very good for any of our crops, as they're not wanting that extra chloride that comes into play. And all of it comes in the sulfate form. So that's an advantage there. With its 4 nutrients all in one, natural fertilizer does provide choice. It's actually organic certified, so you can use it for organic or conventional fruit production. So if we delve into this slide a little bit more, and we try to see what does it that polysulphate provides. So this one is looking at how much calcium. We'll start with calcium. How much can it provide? And this is a comparison against gypsum. So if you look at here in the table at the bottom, the one that's kind of the light blue, it says approximate pounds of calcium released before 40 days. You can see that polysulphate is releasing 58.5 compared to gypsum at 46. But if you look at the full 80 days out, you can see that polysulphate was releasing 88 pounds compared to 78 for calcium, or for gypsum, on the calcium level. And then if you look at the diagram that's on the upper right, the number 1 there is ammonium sulfate, which would be fast. And you see that, it releasing very quickly. And then you see the number 2, or that yellow line, is actually polysulphate. And it's that nice prolonged release of the calcium. And then you can see the gypsum is number 4, down at the bottom. So a definite distinction there as far as the release on those nutrients. So as we talked at the beginning, and we continue on with this calcium piece, we know that calcium is super critical in holding the keys to the puzzle on a lot of these things, as far as making sure that we have a really good quality of fruit that we can go into storage and it's going to hold up well. And so if we look there at the beginning on this diagram on the left, you can see the flowering fruit set. You know, that's where between there and when the fruit has set and it's small, approximately 6 weeks after fruit set, you can see that huge increase in the calcium uptake. And then it kind of levels off and it can get diluted, and we have some of all the other issues like we were talking earlier. But, you know, we also know that in the soil, we have a hard time getting that calcium up into the plant, whether it be from low calcium soils, low or high soil pH. As you see on the right-hand side, calcium is more available when it's neutral, but not as much on either end. And then the other thing that we run into is a lot of competition in the soil between other cations like potassium, magnesium, and ammonium. So a big advantage here with the polysulphate being that prolonged release of the calcium, magnesium, sulfur, and potassium all together, and it being able to help us with coming for some of those. those issues that we face. So then the next one that we look at is that sulfur release. We have ammonium sulfate, that's your very first one there, that dark green bar, and you can see that it's 5 days or less that it's releasing. And then you have sulfate of potash at about 12 days. And then you have the yellow one there that's looking at the polysulphate, so you have a prolonged release up to 50 days. So not only do we have the low carbon footprint and choice in that prolonged release, the other thing that's nice with the polysulphate is we have reduced leaching potential and improved uptake. Here you can see on the left side, the polysulphate has a higher amount of potassium that's taken up by the plant. And then the amount that's left in the soil, the yellow bar, is higher compared to potassium chloride or sulfate of potash. And then the amount that's leached out, the gray bar, is much smaller with polysulphate. So we have an advantage of the plants being able to take up more of it and it not getting moved out of the soil and being held there for a longer period of time and not leached out. So it's providing some good options for us to look at. And so we'd like to go into some of the cherry data next, some of the cherry and pear data. Ashley is going to lead us off on going through some of these trials as we start looking at the polysulphate and what its effect was on the cherries. So Ashley, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Christi. Hi, this is Ashley Thompson from Oregon State University. And for these trials, we were looking at polysulphate at 2 rates, 720 pounds and 320 pounds per acre compared to a control. So this study took place on a grower orchard in the Dalles, Oregon. And here we were looking at a variety of cherry called Black Pearl, and these are all on the Crimsk 5 rootstocks. This grower, he is really invested in mineral nutrition, and he has been doing a lot of foliar sprays in his orchard. So he was really excited to try out this polysulphate product. And you can also see here, it's a randomized complete block design, 4 rows, 3 treatments per row, 10 trees per treatment. And you can see that this was broadcast applied in a circle around the tree. And so we were doing some very typical trials here to look at both fruit quality and also some yield information. We didn't get to do whole tree yields here, but here are some cherry size information. So cherry size is measured in millimeters. And here you can see that we are comparing the 2 treatments to the control. And polysulphate significantly increased the diameter of the cherries by about 0.5 millimeter, which can be important over time. And again, this is the first year of this study, so it was exciting to see a small increase in cherry size after 1 year with polysulphate. Similarly, the weight was also higher numerically, but not statistically. So there is an upward trend for cherry size here, comparing both the polysulphate 360 pounds per acre and the polysulphate 720 pounds per acre to the control. Similarly, we did see a numerical increase here in the sugar, the percent Brix, also known as soluble solids, the sugar content here, which is measured as percent Brix. Numerically, there is a slight increase in polysulphate, 720 and 360 treatments compared to the control. However, this is not significantly, statistically significantly different here, but there is this upward trend after 1 year. And finally, all of the leaf nutrition we collected from this block, everything was in the sufficient range. Like I said, the grower here has been applying a lot of foliar mineral nutrients over the past several years. He was particularly interested in the polysulphate treatments, but didn't really see a huge increase in mineral nutrients. We did see an increase in iron, when we applied polysulphate at that 720 pounds per acre rate. So we did see some significant differences and also some upward trends here from the polysulphate trial. So next we're going to talk about the Agrolution pHLow and the ICL pulse trial here. And I did get a question, what are the SOPs and MOPs as in question 1? So I don't know, Christi, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Okay, so SOP would be sulfate of potash. So you'd be looking at sulfate of potash is like your 0050 that has the sulfate in it. If you're looking at muriate of potash, that's typically what people would call potassium chloride, or 0060 on the analysis. So those are the products that we'd be looking at.
Thanks so much for that information, Christi. I appreciate it. I thought of SOPs as what is the standard operating procedure? That was the first thing that came to my mind this morning. So to jump back in, so again, we were looking at Agrolution pHLow and ICL pulse, again at that same orchard where we had Black Pearl on crimp 5. And this is a randomized complete block design again, 4 blocks, 3 treatments, 10 trees per treatment. And here you can see the control, just some notes about the control treatment, because we didn't really have a true control here. We were comparing the pHLow and ICL pulse at 2 different rates to just the Agrolution pHLow here. And just for further clarification, everything else in this trial was held completely the same. Grower nitrogen application rates, other mineral nutrition, it was all held the same. So Christi, do you want to talk a little bit about the ICL Pulse product here?
Yeah, so I mentioned at the beginning, and I was thinking about saying I was riding on the teeter-totter, and I like to be in the fulcrum. Pulse, this product, with having the P and the K and the magnesium, along with the cobalt and the moly or molybdenum, nickel, and zinc, is a really valuable product for being able to put on from a foliar standpoint. We know that we need to have enough moly so that we can have good fruit set, and we also have to have enough moly so that we can have good nitrogen uptake, because moly is a component of the nitrogenase and the nitrate reductase enzyme systems. And so if we don't have enough of it, enough moly or molybdenum, then we don't have good flower formation or fruit set. And because of the connection with nitrogen, we don't have good chlorophyll production and a lack of nitrogen. It also has a good amount of nickel that's in here, as well as zinc that's chelated. So it's providing some of these critical nutrients as a foliar application with the Pulse product that we utilize. And then the other products that we're looking at putting on here within this cherry trial is one of the Agrolution pHLow products. These have an advantage of having that lower pH to them, so that you can be able to have the nutrients be able to be taken up well. And also I'll show you some in the next one of the pictures of just, you know, all of us have faced when we get those plugged emitters and that hard water and how hard it is. So the pHLow actually helps us to clear that out. But the one that we used for this trial here with Ashley that she's going to be showing you the results on are for the Agrolution pHLow, that's the high PK. It's a 63131 as far as the analysis, and it would be considered more of a crop finisher. If you were interested in one, you can see there that we have one that's a starter that has zinc with it. And then the other one to bring to your attention would be for fruit set and reproduction there at the bottom. We do have one that's a high K, and it's a 15627 along with 3.3% calcium. So there's definitely a lot of choice that comes in our Agrolution pHLow line. But here's some visuals that kind of highlight for you, you know, if you look at that clear water on the bottom left, and then you look at on the right side, thinking about that hard water and the plugging of the emitters, and then the one on the upper left is kind of the result, thinking about if we don't have even water distribution because we've got plugged lines, then we have not good water that's moving or nutrients with those two being connected. So the pHLow lines help us with that hard water and making sure that we can have better nutrients that are going into the plant without having to put on like heavy acids and other things. We can utilize these products without having to do heavier ones. So it's an easier solution, and we're providing the nutrients that go along with it at the same time, so it's kind of a win-win. Turn it back to you, Ashley.
Thanks so much, Christi. So again, we decided we were going to look at cherry size here, and this is measured in diameter. And here we are comparing the control, not a true control really, but pHLow, the control, a pHLow with 8 ounces per acre of ICL pulse, and a pHLow with 16 ounces per acre of ICL pulse. And here we actually saw that the 8 ounces per acre of ICL plus and pHLow increased cherry size significantly compared to just pHLow alone and also the control. And so we saw a slight increase with pHLow and the 16 ounce of ICL plus compared to the control. And you know, this is it looks like this is a pretty significant difference between the pHLow and the control here, or the pHLow and the 8 ounces of ICL plus in the control, and the pHLow and 8 ounces of ICL plus compared to just the pHLow alone. And this was exciting for us. The grower was really interested in this product because it did contain molybdenum, or it does contain molybdenum. So he was really interested in taking a closer look at that. We didn't see any increase in leaf nitrogen or anything like that after 1 year, but he's really interested in seeing how this looks after year 2 as far as leaf nutrients go. We also saw a significant increase in stem retention when we applied pHLow plus the 8 ounces of ICL plus, and this was compared to the control and just pHLow alone. And this is interesting because cherry stem retention is just so important for the marketability of cherries, particularly, you know, in export markets, but also domestic markets as well, because people want a cherry with a beautiful green attached stem. So if we can keep those stems on and increase that stem retention and the stem pull force as measured on the left-hand side of this graph here, if we can increase those, that's really great for the growers. People, like I said, want that beautiful green stem. And usually we associate that stem retention and increased stem retention with either plant hormones or with increased calcium in the fruit and stem. Next, we're going to look at the cherry weight. So cherry weight was measured as the weight of a single cherry, so how many grams a single piece of fruit weighed. And here you can see a trend upward with pHLow in the 8 ounces of ICL pulse and pHLow in the 16 ounces of ICL pulse. However, this wasn't statistically significant. You can see there's pretty big error bars here. And similarly, we saw something similar with our percent Brix, or our soluble solids that we were measuring here. pHLow with 8 ounces of ICL plus and pHLow with 16 ounces of ICL plus seemed to increase the cherry sugars a little bit numerically, but we didn't really see anything statistically significant here. I will say I'm really interested in continuing this study into next year. Cherry prices were pretty good this year. So the grower didn't want me to do a whole tree harvest after we had put all of this together. So hopefully next year we're able to harvest more fruit per tree. Here we were taking a couple hundred fruit per tree. So I'm really hoping next year we might be able to get a whole tree harvest. So next we're going to talk a little bit about the agronomy or review of the pear trials we did here. Christi, I don't know if you want to talk about these or if you just want me to talk about them. Here we're looking at
You can go ahead and then I'll.
Okay. Yeah,
you
that
go
works.
ahead and then I'll jump in the middle if I need to.
That works. Here we're looking at Nova Peak and High Peak and also pHLow. So this site in Hood River, Oregon, has volcanic soils that tend to be low in plant available potassium, and that can cause some problems. Sometimes we see issues with the pears ripening quickly on the tree and falling off, small fruit size, things of that nature. So this grower was really excited to try both Nova Peak and High Peak because they are high in potassium. So we were really excited to put this out in his orchard. And here we have, again, grower orchard in Hood River. We're looking at D'Anjou on Old Home by Farmingdale 87. We have a randomized complete block design. Here we had 5 trees per treatment per experimental unit. And here we are looking at the treatment options. Christi, do you want to go through the treatment options? I don't know if this is the point where, just to discuss, so we have
I can highlight.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So the Nova Peak, as is listed here, and I mentioned at the beginning, it's one of our Nova line of products. We have a whole bunch in that option. But this one's 05234, so a little bit more on the phosphorus side. The High Peak is a 04444, so kind of a balanced approach there. The Nova Peak is a little bit more acidic product. The High Peak is more neutral, and the High Peak has a lot. It has a lot of product that can go in when we're mixing it in with the other nitrogen sources. So you can have a good balanced product that can be there at a neutral pH. So we kind of wanted to be able to try both and see how they worked in the pear orchard and see how it did that way.
Thanks so much, Christi. So for this study, we were looking at whole tree yields in addition to leaf mineral nutrients, and then we did some fruit quality right at harvest, and we'll be doing some fruit quality after the pears have sat in storage for 60 days, and then they have been ripened. So the most exciting result we have right now is when you look at this yield efficiency, which is measured as the kilograms of fruit per trunk cross-sectional area. You can see here that Nova Peak is numerically higher than the High Peak, and it's probably about the same as the control, but Nova Peak may be increasing the fruit potassium. We'll really get a better look at that after the fruit has been ripened and we look for any sort of post-harvest disorders that typically are associated with low potassium. That's really our interest for this study. But it is nice to see that there might be this slight increase. We're looking forward to doing this again in this orchard, just because he has had so many issues with nutrition in the past several years. He just purchased this orchard about 3 years ago, and it's been kind of problematic. Next we have the, oh, sorry, go ahead, Christi.
Real quick, while we're still on this slide, I guess for me, the other thing that this highlights is that we really need to be thinking about the overall orchard management, and as Ashley mentioned, it needed potassium, and so we start thinking, okay, let's think about some potassium sources, but it has to be in balance. So we have to think about the phosphorus too, and what do we need as far as that standpoint. So the Nova Peak had that 05234. So we need to make sure that we're looking at the soil and the tissue analysis and understanding what the crop needs and finding the best match for it. And this was a foliar application, so really I would say we need to think about a systems type approach as we do these. So, we're showing you the pieces here of the polysulphate, but we can also utilize the high peak or the nova peak as a foliar, or potentially through the drip irrigation. So there are some options that we can think about as we balance them going forward.
So here in the next trial, again at the same Anjou orchard on Old Home by Farmingdale 87, we have a randomized complete block design with 10 trees per an experimental unit, and we are comparing just the grower standard practice versus Agrolution pHLow, which is a 631-31. So we were comparing those two treatments. Christi, do you want to say anything else about the Agrolution pHLow at this point?
No, I'll do it at the end.
Okay, that works. And, pHLow, there was a significant increase in pear yield efficiency. And as I said before, that's measured as kilograms of fruit per trunk cross-sectional area. So we did have a significant increase in the kilograms of fruit per trunk cross-sectional area when we applied pHLow. Now, for both of these studies, I'm really looking forward to seeing how the fruit comes out of storage, because I think that's going to be pretty telling and it'll give us a good idea of how this might affect, grower returns, packing house shrinkage, things of that nature when we pull these fruit out of storage. Otherwise, we're excited by these results. We're looking to continue doing this I'm looking to continue doing this for the next few years. Hopefully ICL is as well, because as we know, trees set their fruit buds for this year for the following year. So I'm really hoping we can continue to look at this and see if we're seeing any trends over 2 or 3 years. So I'm going to turn it back over to Christi.
Awesome, thank you. So, we have to do a balance. We did our teeter-tottering, but it's going to go back and forth. If we stay at that fulcrum point, then we can have an opportunity to be able to pick and choose and do the things that we need to do in the orchard management and also in the fertility and the irrigation management as they come into play, and thinking about the overall health of the soil, the nutrient uptake, all of it definitely comes into play. So we have polysulphate as an option of an innovative nutrient solution, as I showed you, that's got that prolonged release of sulfur, calcium, magnesium, and a low chloride potassium, and low carbon footprint, less leaching. We were able to see positive results of the polysulphate in cherries with enhanced fruit diameter, weight, sugar content, and the tissue iron content. Iron content and preventing iron chlorosis in NAR soils is definitely important. So that's another piece to the puzzle that we're glad that was happening there with the polysulphate. And the polysulphate can be utilized. We have this trial here that we did on the cherries, but we can utilize it with pears and also with apples. If we look at the highly soluble nutrients that we have a whole cross-section and a lot of choice for growing solutions. Those that we have that are our Agrolution pHLow line that are acidifying water-soluble fertilizers really help with that tree fruit uptake demands and reducing the buildup in our drip irrigation lines. We were able to see positive results with the Agrolution pHLow 631-31 and the Foliar application at fruit set of the ICL pulp that has the moly in it as well as the nickel. And we were able to see the cherries having an increased diameter, weight, stem retention, and sugar content. Along with that, with the Agrolution pHLow, we saw an increased pear yield efficiency with that pHLow 63131 on the pears. I didn't show you the results here today, but we have seen some in New York on apples where we have the 63131 that is increasing the yield also with the apples. So we're continuing on with our apple trials and looking at more that we've got out this year and looking at them with some of the high density orchards. So overall, we have a lot of options for you to consider as far as growing solutions. We have the polysulphate that we would want you to incorporate into the soil for all of your orchards, whether you're talking pears, apples, or cherries, for that blended nutrient, low carbon footprint, good availability to the plants, that calcium that is so critical that we have early in the season for our orchards. And then we have the Agrolution pHLow line that we can fertigate, and then we can use the High Peak, Nova Peak, ICL Pulse, and a lot of other options that we have out there so that we can design a systems type approach for your orchard. And with that, I will open it up for questions from the group. If you guys would like to put, and gals, any of your questions, you can put it in the Q&A box and put them in there. That would be great. We would welcome your questions so that we can answer them.
Christi, we already have a couple of questions that have come in. We can get started with those.
Okay.
And maybe you or Ashley can just jump in, whichever one of you wants to answer it. The first one is, if I was only going to use 2 Agrolution pHLow products, which 2 would I start with for fruit trees?
Okay, good question. So I guess I would look at, obviously you saw some of the data today on the Agrolution pHLow, that's a 63131 for more of that fruit set and finishing off the end of the quality and the yield. So I would definitely consider that one. And then I guess if I was going to consider another one, if I knew I was wanting to get started off right and I had some challenges with getting phosphorus and zinc up into the plant, which we struggle with, then I'd consider an 11-45-11 that has a 2% zinc already with it, so that I can get that good phosphorus and zinc at the beginning and get the tree started off right. So those are 2 of the ones that I would consider putting on. There's obviously a lot of other options to consider, and it would be depending on what nutrients you have been short on in your area. Then I would look through that list of questions or that list of products, and we'll be able to provide you with another one if you were short on a separate nutrient.
All right. Our next question is, does polysulphate completely eliminate the need for foliar or fertigation applications of calcium?
Yeah, polysulphate, I would say, does not completely eliminate it. It certainly could go a long ways for reducing a lot of the calcium that would be required. In some situations, it may completely eliminate it if you didn't have huge restrictions and a lot of tie-up in your soil of the calcium. But it certainly can be a huge piece to the puzzle in eliminating a lot of those costly foliar sprays, and not only from the expense of putting them on, but the time. And then, as I showed in that diagram, you have the dilution that goes on later in the season, and if we can utilize that polysulphate and it's in the soil and we're taking up that calcium early, we can really set ourselves up where we have good fruit set, good quality, good cell wall, strength and durability, and then it'll set us up better for that context, and then we can add some additional foliar if we needed to.
All right. I'd like to encourage people to continue to send in questions if you have any. Our next question is, how is polysulphate different from sulfate of potash, muriate of potash, and K-mag?
Okay, so I touched on it a little bit. So your SOP that was asked about earlier is your sulfate of potash. So that's a 0050 sulfate-based low chloride product. Your muriate of potash is just the KCl or MOP, and it's 60%. And then if you have your K-mag, it's actually got 21%, about 21% potassium, 10 mag, and 21% sulfur. So it's got potassium, magnesium, and sulfate. What it is lacking is it's lacking calcium in comparison to the polysulphate. And if you look at, remember from our diagrams, in addition to that, we have that prolonged release and better nutrient uptake and availability that comes with the polysulphate. So it's got more to it. It's got more oomph for you to be able to have with the 4 nutrients all in one.
Well, all right. It doesn't seem like we have any other questions coming in, so we can go ahead and wrap up the webinar. But I really want to thank, of course, our speakers for preparing all this, and to ICL for sponsoring the webinar and making it possible. If you would like to rewatch or all or part of this webinar, you can find the link at growingproduce.com/webinars. You will also get a link tomorrow in your email, just as a reminder that you can rewatch it or check parts of it. And you can even just log back in a couple of hours at the link you used to register and log in today. So again, thank you so much for taking time out of your day, taking time out of our day. We're glad to do it. Thank you for taking time out of your day for watching this webinar and showing an interest in all this great information. So thank you again. Have a great day.